To start off the series on how to best prepare for your IB biology exams, I wanted to begin by talking about command terms. Now, as students, these are really important for you because they indicate the level of depth that your response requires in order to achieve full marks on your paper 2. For example, if you were asked to outline sodium ion movement across the cell membrane, your answer would be much different than if you were asked to simply state the mode of transport sodium ions use to get inside of cells. And a lot of times I find students overlook this because they don't think it's that important, but really, understanding your command terms will save you so much time and effort because it will guide your answer and structure your response so that you can have a nice, clear answer to any question that you are faced with. This video will be structured around the assessment objectives IB has laid out for its biology courses. They are represented on this triangle in order to represent their hierarchy in terms of their level of depth. We will begin by defining these objectives. Alright, so first up we have demonstrate knowledge and understanding. Questions around this objective will focus on recalling facts, concepts, and terminology. You should also be able to remember methodologies and techniques that you learned in class. And above all else, you must be able to communicate scientific information. Application questions test your ability to take previous information that you learned in class and apply it to completely new situations. This builds on that knowledge and understanding that they assessed in the first objective. Finally, questions on your exam will ask you to formulate, analyze, and evaluate information presented to you. These questions are usually the most challenging and where students tend to lose the most amount of marks. So this is when they might ask you to generate new hypotheses, generate research questions and predictions, and as well as use the methodologies and research techniques you learned in class to generate new predictions. You will be given primary and secondary data in order to create scientific explanations. Let's take a look at some command terms that test your ability to demonstrate knowledge and understanding. So first up, we have define. This is when you have to give a precise meaning of a word, phrase, concept, or physical quantity. Make sure to give measurements when necessary. You might also be asked to draw, which is when you give a diagram that represents some concept. You'll often be asked to label. Here's an example of a drawn and labeled diagram that shows the proteins found in a cell membrane. You must use a ruler to create straight lines and clear labels. You might also be asked to give a list, which is when you give a sequence of answers with no explanation required. Don't do anything more than you have to waste time. Next up, you might be asked to measure something, which is when you obtain some value or quantity. Again, make sure to use units. Or you might ask to state something, which is when you give a specific name or value without explanation or calculation required. Again, don't waste time giving calculations if you don't need to. Let's go over some command terms related to application questions. First up is annotate, which is when you're asked to add brief notes to a diagram that already exists. So you'll be given a graph and you must label it. To calculate means to obtain some value, and this time you must show all relevant work. You might also be asked to describe something, which is when you give a detailed account. You might also be asked to distinguish between two or more things, two or more concepts. And this is what you have to make sure to refer to both concepts throughout your answer to make a clear difference. You might also be asked to estimate, which is when you obtain an approximate value based on data presented to you. Identify means to provide the correct answer from a number of different possibilities. And finally, you might be asked to outline something, which is to give a brief account or summary of a concept. Here are the command terms that will test your ability to formulate, analyze, and evaluate scientific information. First, let's talk about analyze. This is when you break down a concept in order to highlight the essential elements of that concept. If you're asked to comment on something, you must give your opinion or judgment based on that statement or data or some sort of calculation. Now, a common command term is to compare. This is when you give an account of the similarities between two items. And make sure to make constant references to both items throughout your response. This will get you maximum points. Similarly, if you're asked to compare and contrast, you must give an account of the similarities and differences between two or more items. Again, making sure to reference both concepts throughout your response. Examiners really want to see you comparing and contrasting both items throughout your response. When you're asked to construct something, this is usually when you display information in the forms of a diagram or graph. You might be asked to deduce something, which is when you make a conclusion based on information provided to you. If you're asked to design something, you usually just have to create a quick sketch or model or simulation based on what prompt you were faced with. When asked to determine something, you must obtain the only possible answer, again based on some kind of prompt. If you are to discuss something, you must offer a balanced and considered review that includes both a range of arguments, factors, and hypotheses. Your opinion should always be clear and always be based on evidence. If you are asked to evaluate, you must make a judgment. You must give your opinion by considering the strengths and weaknesses of some kind of concept. Similarly, if you're asked to explain, you must give a detailed account including strengths and limitations of a concept. Note the distinct difference between evaluate and explain. If you are asked to predict something, you must make a reasonable guess based on scientific knowledge. If you are asked to produce a sketch, you must, by means of a diagram or graph, convey some kind of information or relationship. Soon, on the next slide, you will see a graph that I drew of enzyme activity and temperature. It will show the rate of reaction, which is a correlate to enzyme activity, and temperature, and how those things change as the different variables change. Finally, we have suggest, which is when you propose some kind of solution, hypothesis, or other answer in response to a prompt. Thank you for listening. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to use these command terms to make really, really good practice questions. And I really think this is the best way to study, so if you're interested in learning about that, stay tuned.